各位观众，大家好，欢迎收看港湾 TV。今天是1月22号，星期五。昨天呢是1月21号，星期四。按道理来讲，昨天应该有新闻简报，但是呢，给大家打声招呼。前天他们发了邮件通知说，周四是3点钟新闻简报。昨天的下午来了个邮件，说今天的上午10点30分会有省长、以及卫生厅长和首席医官3个人共同召开记者招待会，是有关新冠疫情，我们 BC 省新冠疫苗的下一步计划的一个新闻简报。那么换句话说，他们的昨天下午3点钟的新冠疫情的新闻简报就没有给大家做了，所以呢很遗憾，我本来都准备好了，结果没有了，他们不开了，所以就挪到今天上午10点。那么昨天的数字呢也是500多，前天是500整，好像是。那么昨天是500多，有一个好消息呢，就是住院人数昨天才302人，重症监护是62个还是63个，也是显著下降这个也是自我安慰一下。虽然新增人数又有往回走的趋势，因为前几天都到过300多、400多，后来到500多，到了周末，周一的时候是300多，那现在又回到了500多，但是呢，从这个住院人数来讲，没有显著增加。好了，我们的省长来了啊，省长，然后是卫生厅长 Andrew Dix 和首席医官，还有一个可能这个教授是疫苗的这个专家。
Good morning, everyone. It's good to be here on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people, the Songhees Nisquamish First Nation. I'm joined today by my colleague Adrian Dix, Minister of Health, Dr. Bonnie Henry, our Provincial Health Officer, and Dr. Penny Ballum, who's joining us on the immunization response team. It has been a year Monday
他说正好是去年的周一正好是1周年了。
And I know for all British Columbians this has been an unprecedented year.
所以这个1年他说大家都很难很多都经历了困难都很多停止了活动因为这个1年之前正好这一天是搞一个发现了一个我们 BC 省第1例那个新冠，所以在这我们从那天起就是经历了，然后呢，我们每一天都在进步，我们希望恢复到正常的工作所以已经对于我们经济上了都造成了很大的困难。但是呢，我们现在呢，那个疫苗呢，昨天为止呢，已经超过了10万人的接种。
From off the track, we have a long, long way to go.
所以我们还有很长的路要走。我们希望我们全省人民都团结起来，共同面对这个病毒抗疫。所以都是团结如一人的意思。
The countless numbers of frontline workers,
那么也感谢所有在前线的医护人员和工作人员也是包括给我们提供食物他们就提供了一个还运输每天每周每月都在面对病毒的困难环境下给我们提供基础服务。
4.3 million British Columbians in a vaccinated situation
那么今天呢，我是正式给430万省民宣布这个新冠疫苗的接种计划。所以我们要确保我们希望大家我们所做的每一个措施都是遵照科学的规律来做，一步一步。我们的计划优先次序是风险最高的人给他们接种。
And the science is very clear.
The single biggest factor
for death or severe illness is age.
那么他说这个科学已经告诉我们，这个新冠病毒对年纪是最冲击最大的，所以年纪最大、致命性最高、致死性越高。那么60岁以上的特别，所以这个我们的科学家、我们的医生都是重点关注年纪大的病人，所以特别是这些长期护理院的居民以及他们的护理人员，包括他们的风险是最大的人。所以这个我们的接种计划是从他们开始，是为他们为主，所以只要是下一步也是疫苗一来，我就先给他们来。那么从3月份以后呢，因为货量开始充足了，那么也是从年龄开始往那个年龄越大的我也先给他们打。那么4月份以后呢，开始对全省的居民开始普遍接种。包括了这个我们要开放各个体育场以及我们的这个 BC Place、Canada Place 等等，然后呢也是要考虑到这些这个远离的居民的这个广阔的农村地区、偏远地区也要给他们考虑到。所以我们的信息是很清楚的，我们的这些疫苗接种计划是一贯的、持续的，不会被任何的因素去可以打乱。我们现在所做的都是根据联邦政府给我们的疫苗的这个货运量来做的。所以我们是就算是给任何人抱怨，对联邦政府抱怨也没于事无补。所以一定要根据这个大家心往一处使。
We've run into a snaggle in Europe. That's a problem not for the federal government. That's a problem for Canadians. And we need to stand fast and ensure that we get the vaccines we deserve, that we pay for,
所以他说，在欧洲的这个厂的这个火灾着火是导致了我们联邦政府得货的量不多这个不是单单我们 BC 省的，也是我们整个加拿大人都受到了影响。所以，那么接下来的话，那个我们现在重新修正我们的疫苗接种计划。那么他说，随着美国的总统川普下台以及拜登上台了之后，更加注重了这个科学以及。所以我们也更加听从专家和科学家的建议不断的要保证每个基础工作人员的安全我们要保证每个省民满足他们的所需，所以也希望大家能够完全遵守我们的卫生行政命令卫生指南我们希望大家，我们也看到了这个结果会越来越好也不是如果要保持人群的距离保持社交距离，勤洗手同时呢，他也把口罩拿出来说，在这个很多的情况下，如果不能保证社交距离的话，希望大家能够要戴口罩他说完了，因为这个就是现在他们这个环境下就是要戴口罩因为是室内长时间的密闭。那么现在呢，由那个保尼医生给大家汇报一下，就是我们 BC 省的BC 省的这个新冠疫苗的接种计划这个是我们历史上最大的一个疫苗接种计划。所以这个是我们 BC 省一共是430万省民，每人2针的话就要860万支疫苗。那么我们呢是根据年龄来，从年纪最大的先打，然后呢，因为他们的风险是最大，然后再到年纪轻的。
And right now, the vaccines that we have require 2 doses. So that is
所以今天呢是给大家大约的一个时间表，大家可以看看这个自己看看会从几月到几月从4月到9月份这个时间段里边，我们每一个合资格的省民合规这个条件的都可以打。所以这个里边 eligible 里边包括一些什么过敏史等等，就可能不一定了。这个我不是医生。 那么现在呢，我们这个整个全省有172个诊所、社区诊所这个是我们 BC 省。那么3月份的话，就开始要准备好了，都要设置好。
This is going to be and needs to be an all of BC effort to make sure that we can protect those most vulnerable and then everybody in our communities. As mentioned, we'll also be using mobile sites where necessary and home visits to support those who are unable to go to clinics. And we'll be undertaking a province-wide communication effort to make sure people are informed about these clinics. And in March, we'll have the opportunity to pre-register, to sign up for appointments, which, based on age, through your mobile device, computer, or by phone. So we know that the Government of Canada has committed that every Canadian who wants to be vaccinated will have access to vaccine by the end of September. To date, we've done over 100,000 people in British Columbia, those who are most vulnerable to severe illness or to death from vaccine.
所以呢，现在为止，我们已经超过10万人已经打了第1针了。那么，我们的科学也证明了这个疫苗是能够有效的，并且拯救生命的。
To date, we have two vaccines, the
Pfizer
BC vaccine and the Moderna vaccine, both of which require 2 doses. And our mass immunization program, the population protection program that will be starting in April, is based on these vaccines and what we have been committed to receive here in British Columbia over the next few months. So it starts with, we have 6 million doses of vaccine for Q1 from January to March, and we did receive early access to some of this vaccine in December, and we started our immunization programs in December. But that is early access to the same amount of vaccine that Canada has expect between now and the end of March. Starting on the 1st of April in Q2, we expect to receive 20 million doses of vaccine, and in Q3, 45 million doses. So our plan is based on these expectations. For us here in British Columbia, that has meant from December until the end of March, we expect to receive just under 800,000 doses of vaccine. And then from April to the end of June, another 2.6 million doses. And finally, from June to September, about 6 million doses. As you can see, once again, these are back-end loaded, so our plan takes that into account. We also hope and expect that other vaccines will become available as we go through the next few months. Particularly, we know the AstraZeneca vaccine, which is a viral vector vaccine, is under consideration by Health Canada. And if and when it comes online, it is a little bit more flexible in that it is a fridge-stable vaccine. So we'll be able to add that in addition to the plan that we're presenting. We're basing it on what we know or what we expect to receive in the next 6 months here in British Columbia. So as we said, our population to be vaccinated is about 5.2 million people in the province. Right now, none of the vaccines that are in the pipeline or have been approved are approved for use in children under the age of 18. And that's approximately 900,000 young people here in British Columbia. So our population eligible right now is about 4.3 million people. We expect as of April 1st that we'll still have about 4 million people still need to be vaccinated. Around 600,000 will be people who receive their first dose between December and March, and the balance are people who will need 2 doses. So that takes us to about 7.4 million doses that we'll need to provide to people in BC between April and September. Our immunization plan is based on evidence and data and focused on immunizing people who are most vulnerable to the virus first. And we know that the single greatest risk factor for severe illness and death from COVID-19 is increasing age. And that increase, that risk increases exponentially after age 70. And we see that every day, every week in our data. The approach that we have increases protection for those with very severe risk factors as well, as these also increase with age. We have been looking at this question in some detail across the country, internationally, and of course here in British Columbia as well. And early on, the National Advisory Committee on Immunization, and here in BC, we had put out some large groups of people, including essential workers and people who need to be at their workplace. We now know that with the way the vaccine will be arriving in British Columbia and in Canada, and with the risk that we're facing, that the most appropriate approach right now to meet our goals of reducing morbidity and mortality, so sickness and death from COVID-19, is to use that overriding risk factor of age. We know that adults older than 60 have at least 5 times increased risk of hospitalization and death compared to those less than 45 years of age, and in particular people over 80 have double the mortality risk of even those in the 60 to 65 year age group. Using British Columbia data, we've looked at all of the different aspects. We know that people with single risk factors like diabetes, like kidney disease, high blood pressure, ischemic heart disease, COPD, are more likely to have a more severe illness. But that is compounded by age. And when we look at our population, the probability of having those underlying chronic conditions also goes up with age. And we can see that from the data here in British Columbia. Both the proportion and the numbers of people with chronic underlying medical conditions is also highly associated with age. The one that is the most associated with younger age groups is asthma. But we do know that it's actually severe uncontrolled asthma that is the greatest risk, and that is one that goes up with age. And when we looked at this data and put it into models here in British Columbia, using the hospitalization data that we have here, we know that there is slightly increased risk with a number of these underlying conditions, but overriding all of that is the risk with age. So going in an age-based model captures the majority of people with underlying risk factors first. So here we have the age bands that we have here in British Columbia. As you can see, we have 250,000 people who are aged 80 or over in this province. Many of them will be, a proportion of the group will be people who live in assisted living and long-term care, who will be covered in phase 1. But we have a large group of community dwelling seniors who will need to be provided with vaccination as soon as we're able to, and that group of people will be eligible later in February. We were hoping it would be earlier, but now it's going to be later in February and into March. And with the shift in not providing first doses in February because of the delay from the Pfizer vaccine in particular, we are looking into the later part of March, hopefully being able to start immunization in people in the 75 to 80 year cohort as well. We will be doing it by birth cohort, which means people born in the birth year of 1941 and earlier would be the first people eligible to receive vaccine starting in late February and early March and going down from there. And I'll now turn it over to Dr. Ballum to provide some more details about the plan as we move forward.
Ballum 医生给大家讲一下这个计划我们现在是第一阶段疫苗第一阶段。和这第二阶段是从2月份开始。
Thank you so much, Dr. Henry and Mr. Premier. What I'm going to do is just walk you through a little bit more detail about this high-level phase plan, and as I'll share with you, there will be more detail coming in the coming weeks. There will be 4 phases for immunization, and as you've heard, based on expert advice and guidance from the National Advisory Committee on Immunization, BC's Immunization Committee, and Public Health Leadership. It is based primarily on age and focused on protecting people most susceptible to severe illness and death from COVID.
当然年龄是主要的。
第
3阶段和第4阶段主要还是针对公众的。第1阶段、第2阶段主要是那些特别脆弱的高风险人群。高风险的人群不一定是老年人，还有这种这个医护人员啊、基础工作人员等等。
And will continue to the end of February.
所以这个现在目前还是就会继续到这个从第1阶段、第2阶段几乎没有什么大区别。那么第3阶段从4月到6月，第4阶段从7月到9月。
And of course, these phases may vary a little bit depending upon flows of vaccine, but this is a very good platform to start from to get ourselves organized. So really, phase 1 and 2 are the high-risk population. And phase 3 and 4, the broader general population. So what I'm going to do in the next few minutes is just walk you through the details of these 4 phases. This is a summary slide, but I'll take the next slide and just start you with the details of phase 1. This is the current phase we're in, and I think you're aware we started in December 2020, and it will be ongoing through to likely the end of February. And we have had 2 approaches in this part. First, to protect residents and staff of long-term care facilities, of assisted living residences. As you heard from Dr. Henry, these are our highest, most vulnerable risk patients. We also have individuals who are also vulnerable and frail, waiting for long-term care. And essential visitors who are coming into our long-term care homes, our assisted living homes, to actually help their loved ones and family members be cared for and have the necessary care throughout the day. The other aspect of this first phase has been protecting our healthcare system and protecting in order of priority our healthcare workers and medical staff who are basically caring for COVID patients requiring admission to hospital. So settings like intensive care units, our emergency departments, and in the number of hospitals across the province that we have established as our COVID treatment hospitals, we have special COVID wards on those units. And then following on, our paramedics, our broad medical surgical units in our acute care hospitals. And the other part of this first phase is vaccinating our First Nations residents in remote and isolated Indigenous communities. Because as you heard from Dr. Henry, our First Nations have a higher risk, according to, even when compared by age, and when they're living in remote and isolated communities and become ill, it is a logistical challenge to ensure that they get to safety. So that in essence is phase 1, which is still underway. And our hope is that vaccine supply, pending that we will be able to finish that up toward the end of February. Moving on to phase 2, which is February to the end of March. In this part of the phase, we will be able to reach out to the 80-plus age group who have not yet been immunized in phase 1. And these are people that are
也是第1阶段没有补种的、没接种的这个原住民啊、80岁以上的人啊，以及医院的员工啊、职员啊，以及专科医生啊等等，他们都没有接种的。同时呢，就是这些住在或者工作在这些很密闭的环境里边，比如说这种密闭环境的室内啊，以及食品加工啊，特别那些脆弱的群体也要给他们接种。那么第2阶段还会给那些护士啊，以及这个资源支持。这个协助系养老院啊等等这些，或者是对老年人有照顾的机构的这些职员员工，也要给他们开始打。这个是第2阶段。第2阶段呢是2月到3月底，包括了那些庇护所啊等等。
Working to cover off with vaccination, and staff in community home support, and our nurses who are going into individual homes across our province in our home support and home care programs. So this is phase 2.
这个是第2阶段。那么第3阶段呢开始了。
This is when we will start to broaden our reach into the general population.
这个呢就是从也是第79到79这些79岁到60岁的，然后呢这个是5岁一个阶段，5岁一个阶段啊。那么从4月1号到整个4月份。第一季，那么第2季呢，从5月份打，74岁的也是第一季，也是第一针，74岁到70岁也是第一针是4月份打，第2针是5月份打。那么69岁到65岁呢是5月份打第一针，那么第2针呢是6月到7月打，这个很清楚了，我们都轮不上。我们也希望慢点说明我们年纪轻。那么60岁到60岁的呢，是第一针是6月份打，第2针是7月份打。那么69岁到16岁之间的呢，那么特别是那些比较容易生病的这些人，是4月到6月份，你们自己到这个诊所去打。那么如果额外的一些，比如说其他的疫苗都被批准了，而且来面试的话，那么18岁到64岁的人，特别是这些在工作在前一线的第一线的人，或者是那些必须上班的人，那么他们可以在第3阶段的后期可以施打。这个一定是你看他都没说为什么，因为其他阿斯康利以及其他疫苗包括的强生公司疫苗，马上面试被批准的情况下才给他们打。
Or who work in specific high-risk workplaces or industries, we may be able to include starting them off in phase 3, and that's still to be determined. I just want to walk you through our clinically extremely vulnerable patients.
这个刚才说了有一个定义，就是说为什么特别脆弱的人。哪些脆弱的人允许他们可以在第3阶段打？那么哪些呢？就是给大家看了比如说有些人是这个气脏移植的，有些呢有严重的呼吸道疾病的。那有些人呢是有这个很特殊的疾病的包括了这个肺癌或者是这个呼吸道疾病那么我说的比他快一点点。那么还有一些呢就是特别是受到了这个免疫性的疾病的，或者呢是容易受到感染的人。那么有些人呢，或者呢是有些呢是。我有些英文单词不是很懂有些什么可能是哪些器官拿掉的。那么还有一些，特别是这种没有有些详细的计划还没有说这些残疾人哪些残疾人是不能打是特别容易受感染的要打。他说这个呢具体的分析还没出来。还有呢就是那些长期的肾病的第5期肾病。还有1期、2期的第5期的这些肾病的人，那么还有呢，就是有严重心脏病的、怀孕的妇女的，那么他们也可以在第3阶段后期可以打。还有一些就是，比如说这些神经系统的，特别是这些神经系统牵涉到。
Homozygous sickle cell disease, which we're fortunate we have very few patients with that in this province, but these are conditions associated with significant immune suppression. There are a number of groups of patients who take very heavy-hitting immunosuppression therapies that have been a miraculous step forward in the management of their disease, such as rheumatoid arthritis, who are on biologic modifiers that specifically suppress their immune system. High-dose steroids, which most people are familiar, are very immunosuppressive. Drugs such as cyclophosphamide and azathioprine that are used to suppress people's immune response with these autoimmune conditions. People have had a splenectomy. When you remove your spleen, people are much more vulnerable to different kinds of infections. We know from the literature on COVID-19 that adults with significant developmental disabilities can have increased risk, and more details will come of that particular group. Patients on dialysis or with, pre-dialysis chronic severe kidney disease, stage 5, women who are pregnant with significant heart disease. We know they appear from our experience across the world to have a higher risk of an adverse outcome with COVID. And finally, there are patients with significant neuromuscular conditions who are at respiratory risk from respiratory compromise from their neuromuscular ability to, in terms of their respiratory status. So a group of patients that range in ages who have a particularly unique, serious risk of adverse outcome. And so we will be working with different provincial registries and specialty clinics to figure out who these individuals are and how we will approach getting them immunized, starting in phase 3.
好，那么第4阶段来了，这个是大家最关心的，因为我们大多数人都是健康的，而且符合这个从59岁到18岁，也是5年5岁一个阶段。那么59岁到55岁的是7月份打第一针，8月份打第二针；54岁到50岁的7月份打第一针，8月份打第二针；49岁到45岁的也是啊。那么44这个都一样，就是44、59到59到40岁都是第一针7月份，第二针8月份。那么39岁到35岁的呢，要看情况了，是7月份、8月份，第二针呢是8月份、9月份。那么34岁到30岁呢，8月份到9月份了。29岁到25岁也是8月份、9月份到9月份。那等等等等啊。
So there are some now logistical issues that I just want to go over that just describe some of the work ahead to get ready for this very broad immunization campaign. Registration. Starting in mid to late February, we will be working to reach out to our elderly seniors over 80 and our Indigenous seniors 65 plus and elders to provide information on how they can register for a vaccination appointment. And we'll be providing an update on this process in the coming weeks. And the communication plan that will be launched in late February will actually have information of when people can be expected to be vaccinated, how and when they can pre-register, and then how they access the vaccination clinic. Enabling pre-registration really allows us to plan better because it allows us to know how to schedule both human resources, supply chain for vaccine, and other supplies that are necessary. So generally, our present approach is that individuals will be able to register 2 to 4 weeks before they're eligible to have their vaccine, and pre-registration for the 79 to 75 age group that will start getting their vaccinations in April, we will start that. Therefore, in March 2021. And because not everybody, and especially in our older age group, we have a lot of very active, tech-savvy seniors, but there are still some people who are not comfortable with using an online registration, and there will be a call center, a phone mechanism for them to get assistance with registration. I just want to turn now to partnerships. The partnerships that I'm going to just refer to are going to be essential and foundational to our ability to mobilize our public and mobilize our communities to help with a successful campaign. And I think the Premier has outlined just how critical it is that our whole province mobilize behind this whole initiative to get us the protection that we need from this virus in order to get back to business and life as usual. We will be leveraging partnerships with other ministries of the provincial government, local governments, nonprofit groups in the community, the private sector, and others to support the plan. They will have facilities that may be important for us for our mass clinics, such as local governments and First Nations. Some of our civil society nonprofits have networks to reach some populations who require special attention to make sure they understand how to get vaccinated, how to pre-register. We will have other services from partners in the private sector who can provide in-kind help, and also skills and expertise around certain parts of this initiative. And I think we're very fortunate in this province. We have a legacy of large, complex initiatives that require involvement of our whole province, and you know, just an example of that is the 2010 Olympic and Paralympic Games, where one of the most complex events in the year in the world that you have to organize, and we have a huge legacy of people who volunteered for that, private sector businesses who took part in organizing that, and just the people who helped plan that event and pull it off. So moving on to our vaccination clinics, the immunization clinics that we will use in phase 3 and 4 are going to be organized, as Dr. Henry alluded to, in about 172 communities around the province. And those communities have been organized and will be overseen by the local health authorities, and they've been organized to, really be a convenient central location for people to go for their vaccination. And the kinds of clinics we will be holding will include ones in school gymnasiums, in arenas across the province, convention halls, community halls, any place where we can gather, medium to very large groups of people to do this. There will also be a need for mobile clinics, and not only just in rural settings, but also in some of our urban settings to reach people who are hard to reach, such as in shelters. We've used mobile clinic already in the downtown east side to actually vaccinate people close to where they're gathered and make it safe and familiar for them. And people who are homebound due to mobility issues. The details around those different kinds of approaches will be available in late February, early March. Now, going on to the proof of vaccine, I think everybody likes to know how they've been vaccinated, what vaccine did they receive, what was the date. So everybody who goes through this program will receive a paper copy of their vaccine record, but more importantly, they will be able to sign up for the Provincial Health Gateway that will allow them to access their official immunization card in a digital form, and everybody will understand that their vaccination record is not dependent on them carrying around that paper card, but that it is in a provincial data set now, where every vaccine for COVID will be registered and accessible.
所以他说，每一个人都会被通知到你要去领这张记录卡，同时呢，这些数据都会记录在省的数据库里边啊。那么，任何的我们的家庭医生啊，什么都能够看见，都能够看到啊。那这个就是社区。
So I'm going to turn this back to
这个就是社
Dr.
区
Henry
免疫
to
了。
wrap up where we're going to be at the end of all this. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
那么这个是包医生说了，这个社区免疫 herd immunity 就是群体免疫了。那么群体免疫就是指，如果我们 BC 省大家大部分都得到了疫苗的话，那么这样的话我们就是群体免疫了。
This is something the large majority of people in British Columbia want and are willing to do. And we know that every time we immunize somebody, we're helping to save lives. We're protecting those closest to us and our entire community. But we are not yet at that point where we can lift the restrictions in long-term care or in our communities. And really important for success in us getting through this next few months is continuing to take the precautions that we know work. And that means staying home when we're sick, getting tested, making sure we're washing our hands, covering our mouth when we cough, wearing masks when we're in indoor public spaces, and maintaining our safe distances. And right now, the importance of not having social gatherings, of following the restrictions that we have in place so that we can bring our numbers down in the community today while we're rolling out this immunization program. I would love it to be happening instantaneously, but the reality is that the vaccines that are available around the world are in limited supply, and we are going to be getting vaccine in a back-end-loaded way over the next few months, which means we all have to remain vigilant. We need to keep this bargain that we've made with each other, this social contract that we have,
我们的卫生命令啊，希望保持我们的社区安全啊，还有接下来几个月，大家再坚持。我们已经看到了隧道的尽头的光芒了，我们看到曙光了。所以我们过去怎么过来的，我们已经做到了。我们不要再把口罩摘下来啊，这个对我们来讲很重要的。我们已经意识到了这个口罩的重要性，以及我们所有的行为的重要性。我们已经意识到，我们已经看到了把几遍拉群过去，那么我们现在继续能够做到。
but we have an end in sight. And now is our time to stay committed to doing what we need to do to stop the transmission of COVID-19 here in British Columbia, so we can protect everybody with immunization as it becomes available. So I'm going to stop there and say thank you very much, and we'll turn it back over to
所以现在他把话筒就交给省长，省长再总结一下就结束了。基本上最重要的还是 Dr. Ballum 今天说的最重要的啊。
Okay, well, thank you, Dr. Henry and Dr. Ballum, for that presentation. We're Jen's on the microphone. We're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Reminder to reporters on the line, please press *1 to get into the queue if you haven't already done so. We're going to do one question and one follow-up today, and starting with a question from Richard Zisman, Global.
Thank you. Considering that we've already seen delays with the Pfizer vaccine, why should British Columbians trust that we will be able to get the 7.4 million doses needed in order to implement this plan?
Well, as all British Columbians know, we are 30-some million souls in a sea of 7 billion people, all seeking protection from COVID-19. Production is underway with Pfizer and Moderna. They are approved in Canada. Other vaccine providers are in process. AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, a whole host of others are in process. We're confident that with the speed with which Pfizer and Moderna came online will be good news for those other companies that are providing or in the preliminary stages of approvals. So we're confident that by the end of February, that the backlog that we're experiencing, the federal government's experiencing with Pfizer, will be corrected. We're going to be getting those shipments that we anticipated for the week of February 1st before the end of March. So we will have a lot of vaccine and a lot of anxious people looking forward to getting those immunizations. And Dr. Ballum and her team will be at the ready to deliver it. I say to British Columbians who are concerned about the news stories about disruptions in the supply coming to Canada and to other jurisdictions, to be patient, to be calm, and to focus on following public health orders to keep themselves and their loved ones safe at this point, and have confidence that public officials are doing everything they possibly can to get vaccines into Canada, into British Columbia, and into the arms of British Columbians.
Do you have a follow-up, Richard?
There no doubt will be people disappointed today, including some frontline workers, police officers, firefighters,
他说大家毫无疑问啊，这些工作第一线的人啊，教师啊，救火员啊，他们都很焦虑。他们都很一种沮丧啊，这种心情，这个大家都能够理解因为他们没有得到第一优先缺达。他说我也一些收到了一些这个信件他们也有一些组织给我的号召倡议都是要告诉他们这个行业都会第一优先秩序，但是科学家包括伯尼医生告诉我们，主要不是跟职业有关，主要还是年龄有关这个都是我们所做的政策都是根据科学依据来的。
Moderna and Pfizer are the only access points we have to vaccinations, and we'll continue with that using the age criteria until such time as that scarcity of supply is changed. And then, as Dr. Ballum has said, we'll amend our program accordingly. But age is the determining factor in this instance, and I would just say to British Columbians, because I know this is how they feel, if given the opportunity to have a vaccination today, knowing that there are other people that are more vulnerable, I am confident that the vast majority of British Columbians would defer their vaccination to protect someone more vulnerable. That's who we are as a society. That's who we are as Canadians. And I know that we will do everything we can to deliver vaccinations to everyone who wants one by the end of September. That's the plan we're on. And we're going to stick with that until more supply comes on stream, and then we'll reassess.
Our next question is from Gordon Hoekstra, Vancouver Sun.
疫苗的供货量的充足，我们联邦政府承诺的每一个加拿大人都会在9月份能够。
Ernst & Young review of the effect of the pandemic on care homes was not made public, and why the government won't answer some basic questions about it, like such as when it started, when it was completed, its terms of reference and cost.
With respect to the latter questions, it started in the summer of 2020. It's not a review of care homes. It's a review of the services provided by the Health Services Division, people dealing with care homes in the Ministry of Health. How could we could learn from the first phase of COVID-19 to draw lessons for the second phase? The full report's going to be released on Monday. You'll see it. Overwhelmingly, I should say, it's favorable to the performance of the government in the first phase. But it's not a review of care homes or how for-profit care homes or non-profit care homes do or anything like that. It's a review of how we can deliver better services to the care home sector. Its recommendations have been implemented by the staff who were affected by it. At the senior services, we did reach out to a lot of people and get their input as to how we can do a better job. And you'll see every detail of it on Monday and draw your own conclusions.
Gordon, do you have a follow-up?
开始我们政府对这些 care home 的政策不管是私营的还是公营的盈利的非盈利的我们政府对他们这个政策和支持还是比较有利的这个报告支持了我们的之前的做法
Well, it was public in the sense that I think more than 40 groups were consulted as to the kind of services that were provided. It was intended to inform the Health Services Division of the Ministry of Health, and it did so, and its recommendations were accepted and will be released on Monday.
Thank you. Our next question is from Justine Hunter, Globe and Mail.
Thank you. I'm wondering if you can describe like what scenarios show right now about when we get to take our masks off and when we get to gather again.
我们什么情形下我们才能够戴口罩？这个问题问得莫名其妙，什么时候戴口罩？
I think I would love to be able to say.
所以我也多么的希望7月1号就戴口罩，戴口罩戴掉。
I think there's a whole lot of unknowns.
这个很多是未确定因素。我们现在有这个计划，但是这个计划都会一直在变。这个一定要根据我们当初的所处的环境以及这个变化。那么这个社区的群体免疫一定是根据刚才说的这个3个因素来决定是不是群体免疫了。一定要看到。我们也学到了很多对我们有利的因素。大家都看到了夏天传播的比较少，大家都看到了。
So I do believe we'll have some leeway. I think what is consuming us right now is making sure that those areas that we know are most at risk in long-term care and assisted living are protected. And then we can move on. If we start to bring our numbers down by February, that's when the next revision of our orders is potential. February 5th is when the orders come again, and we will be looking at other things that we can do, depending on what we're seeing in transmission risk in the community at that time. So we need to really focus on reducing the transmission risk in our community as low as possible, because that's what drives outbreaks in long-term care. That's what drives exposure events in schools. That's what drives the risk in our social gatherings. And if we can do that, we can start having increased access, social connection again. The one wrench in the spanner in the works is the fact that we are now seeing transmission of variants across the world. Some of these make the virus more transmissible to others. So the UK variant in particular, we've seen a number of cases here, all of them travel-related. We've seen a couple of cases of the South African variant, which are not yet travel-related, associated with travel that we can tell. So those are concerning. If we start to see rapid increase again, there's the potential for that with these variants. So this is just a way of saying we all have to be really careful right now to reduce the risk of transmission, to stop those chains of transmission. But I'm hopeful that once we start getting the most at-risk people immunized, we start having enough people in the population so that it makes it more challenging for the virus to transmit between people. And we know it doesn't transmit as easily in the spring and summer. that by the summer we should be able to have some types of our normal lives back again. But the full back to what we would like to have in terms of social interactions and being together is not likely until the fall.
那么之前，但是现在看来，如果要完全回到正常的生活，可能不现实。秋天之前是不大现实。
4 days last week. I'm wondering if you did look at any scenarios, particularly around the economic side of things. When do, for example, you see hospitality and tourism industries starting to rebuild? And just wondering.
那么这个问省长的是一个我们省的经济问题，因为这个病毒对经济冲击很大。
Well, we had a very good working week last week. 4 full days of cabinet discussion on a range of issues. I've also been engaging with the tourism sector. Our visitor economy is critical to every corner of British Columbia. We have a new minister, Melanie Mark, who has been engaging as well with small providers, tourist operators, and large-scale operators to try and find the best way for the province to work with that sector to keep them going until we can once again welcome people from not just across Canada but from around the world to come back to British Columbia. And I'm confident that the relationship we have with leaders in the tourism sector is a positive one. We've amended some of the grant programs that we have in place to meet their needs. That was a high priority for us. Similarly, the Minister of Finance is working on the next budget, and that was the primary focus of our discussions last week. And certainly tourism and the broader economy are absolutely critical to our maintaining our position in Canada as an enviable place to invest, and the highest credit rating in the country still. But we need to work on that. We need to make sure that the programs we put in place make sense to our long-term fiscal plans, but also are there to help those vulnerable companies that are just devastated by COVID-19.
Our next question is from Lisa Yuzda, News 1130.
One question I have for you, Dr. Henry. A couple of weeks ago when you were asked about immunizations for the more at-risk population, as in those getting chemoimmunotherapy transplants, you said you weren't sure. So I'm wondering, because trials hadn't been run on those types of populations, so what have you learned since then? And I'm guessing it's from mass vaccinations in other locations, but what have you learned that you now know that will be safe?
Yeah, so it wasn't, safety was not the major concern. The concern, of course, was that these medications, these vaccines had not been tested in people with certain conditions. And so, yes, we've been looking at what others have found around the world, the UK, Israel, but also our National Advisory Committee on Immunization has been reviewing the data in detail from the clinical trials and looking at what we're seeing with immunologists and people who do this for a living around the world. And it really is about not knowing if people who have immune-compromising conditions will mount as adequate a response. But it is, and we put this out on the BC CDC website, it really is a risk assessment that needs to be made by the individual with their clinician. And the one thing we know is that people with immune-compromising conditions, severe immune-compromising conditions, the ones that we're talking about, do have healthcare providers for the most part. So that's a decision that has to be made. And when we talk about these extremely vulnerable people, they're people that we know are more at risk of having severe illness and dying from COVID. And that's from what we've seen around the world as well. And we will be reaching out to them through, as Dr. Ballum said, through their specialty clinics, through their care providers, to make sure that those important conversations can be had. And of course, if newer vaccines become available that are more traditional, then that we know work effectively in these populations, then we can pivot or switch to making sure that they get those vaccines as well. So that's in the back pocket. But right now, these aren't live vaccines, so that's important. They just haven't been studied in any of these groups.
就是后备，就是把这些，比如说阿斯康利以及强生的，现在还不知道，所以作为他们备案放着备胎啊。
In the immediate and long term, people wanting to make plans. We've got BC Day coming up, then spring break, and then the big one, summer holidays. So how do you suggest people navigate? Should they not be making plans for the next few months and then they can make plans in summer. I'm just wondering how people navigate what they're supposed to do, what they.
那么是给大家夏天的这个度假有没有好的建议很多人开始做计划了特别是2月份的这个家庭日不要做了他说的是不是夏天我说错了他说2月份的家庭日哪怕夏天的计划有些人开始做了那么伯尼森说不要做今年的 Family Day 不要做任何计划包括今年的春节不要去做了我们希望大家还是和现在一样不要再做了。那么到了夏天呢，我们可能情况会不一样。可能会那个不确定这个国际旅行怎么样因为其他的地方还没有几百万人、几十亿人还没有获得疫苗。那么我们 BC 省可能接下来到这个夏天之前我们这个命令是差不多一样的就是避免这个不必要的旅行这个是一样的基本上还是在 BC 省就 BC 省也就是说我们 BC 省可能疫苗走在比较前面所以你就算夏天了你有了你不能全球走人家也不欢迎你去那么恒生上始终就说我们所做的任何计划都是根据这个科学来的我们都有科学依据的
That would be something that we would normally like to celebrate. But we're not making plans right now, and British Columbians shouldn't make plans right now. We should focus on staying safe, being kind, being calm, and as we get more information as the vaccination program rolls out and we see the impact on case counts and all of the other issues that we've been focused on over the past 12 months, we'll be in a better position to make those decisions. I know with respect to campgrounds, for example, Minister Haymond is working on a plan to make sure that we're ready to welcome British Columbians to celebrate and enjoy the abundance of BC. The issues around interprovincial travel, I'm sure I'll get a question on that later on, so I'll just leave that for the moment. But we will be guided by the advice we get from public health officials, and we'll be making decisions in the best interest of all British Columbians.
Our next question is from Binder Sajan, CTV.
Hi there. I'm just wondering with regards to kids under 18
那么这个是跟18岁以下的孩子他们也有焦虑为什么他们不能打因为你这个群体免疫了社区免疫了对他们什么时候打再说你这个问题问得相当好那么现在不要有关心不要焦虑他们这些年轻人因为他们不大容易传也不大容易这个生病但是他们可以传染
The probability is less. It is very likely that once we have more traditional vaccines, they will be
这个和传统的疫苗不一样这个疫苗对年轻人有害所以我们观察很仔细所以目前没有批准给他们打包括是莫德纳和这个辉瑞都是这样现在那个莫德纳呢是在研究12岁以下的孩子能不能打那么现在看来12岁以下的孩子不大容易获得这个得重病就是新冠的重病所以这个我也想说疫苗是有另外一个副作用的所以这个对孩子们是要慎重所以我们现在设立的这个疫苗计划就没有考虑这些孩子们主要是考虑群体免疫群体免疫了孩子们也要保护了那么这个跟疫苗流感疫苗不一样流感疫苗一定要给孩子们打因为年纪轻的不能养因为他们传播太容易了那么这个新冠呢是对老年人太重要太多的好处了所以一定要让老年人先打因为老年人对这个新冠病毒的遭受的痛苦是最严重的风险是最高的这个是如果给老年人打的话马上会从立竿见影的效果会看到所以我们目前呢还是主要是对这些最受风险的人先给他们施打疫苗
This is for Minister Dix on the Ernst & Young report. Stakeholders were told that they would see the report Why haven't they been given a copy, and when did you actually receive it?
So the report was prepared in the fall, I think, in the end of October, the beginning of November. That was when it was completed. It was intended to inform the ministry, and they in fact used it for that purpose. And we'll be sharing it with everyone. You'll see that when you see the report, that it's focused on the Ministry of Health and how it can provide better services. With respect to care home and care home outbreaks, it should be said that our health authorities regularly do reviews of every single outbreak in order to address issues of infection control. Those are not issues that Ernst & Young would be dealing with. So this is a report designed to improve the services of the Ministry of Health. You'll see that when you get it, as will everybody else.
Our next question is from Prabjot Sohal, Red FM.
Good morning. My question is that currently there are some news coming from CDC that they have changed some strategy, and they're saying that in exceptional circumstances, and there might be a switch to another vaccine for the second dose.
他说听说了，有没有你们变化？就是第一针打的品牌和第二针打的品牌不一样，因为中供货量不一样。因为英国有些是混起来打的。你们看到了国际上其他的专家有没有这个建议和信息？他说是的，我们也是在跟国际上相关的组织也在讨论这些问题，已经讨论了几个礼拜。因为辉瑞这个供货太慢了你问的问题相当好。我们加拿大同行这个周末也在讨论这个问题。我们也在看这个数据，看看。根据我们的同行，英国的同行也在看，他们的计划是怎么样。那么英国呢是这样的，他们延长了第二针的时间到3个月。那么我们认为这个这个疫苗的有效性，大家很多的有些这个描述方面的语言这个里边，他用词用的用词很谨慎。因为这个两种疫苗的技术是一样，不是灭活疫苗，是 mRNA。那么这个是机理是一样的，所以他们是相互可以交互的。但是这个不是一个唯一的手段我们不一定是因为供货量不足才去做这些事情有可能是让我们是可能第一就是第二针延长时间打或者是呢第二针呢是用其他的品牌来打我们现在还不知道从用哪一个方法来告诉大家我们这个礼拜天还会有这个各方面这方面的讨论这个现在就两种因为现在疫苗紧张第一就是延长第二针延长到3个月我们现在35天那么第二个呢就是考虑到就是用同一个技术的不同品牌来混打
and there is no Pfizer vaccine available for second doses we have to make a decision about
那么就是说就是超过了42天了辉瑞还没有那怎么办我们必须决定到底是延长第二针还是用莫德纳的疫苗那么我们现在还没决定我们马上会决定现在还没有我们要估量哪一个方法比较好
evidence or data
这个记者问得相当好那么目前为止他说还没有确切的数据指引或者是规范以及建议都没有还没有所以我们要等英国同行所以现在呢英国和以色列都走在比较前面加拿大呢是一个跟随者所以还有相当的数据可以去分享得到他们这个里边呢就说到了灭活疫苗不能打了比如说你第一针打的是 mRNA 技术的辉瑞或者莫德纳第二针你不能打科兴的或者打国产的另外一种牌子的这个灭活疫苗
It may be preferable to extend the delay to receiving a second dose all very challenging questions that we deal with in immunization programs. Sometimes, the one other situation that we run into all the time is people don't know what their first dose is. So they don't know whether they got Pfizer or Moderna in this case. Right now, that's not as much big a deal, but as we go into population immunization with large numbers of people, that may be more important. And that's why some of our focus is on having our immunization registry, where we can tell exactly which vaccine everybody got and which lot number, which is part of our safety profiles as well. So those are the situations that we're dealing with. I mean, this is the reality of planning and being able to be flexible and trying to use the best information we have to make the best choices that we can in the different circumstances.
Next question is from Tanya Fletcher, CBC. Go ahead, Tanya.
It looks like Tanya has actually left the queue. So
okay.
We're going to move on to Mary Griffin with Check News. Go ahead, please, Mary.
Well, thanks very much. My first question concerns seniors. Minister Dix, you addressed this in a previous briefing about the issue of essential visitors and long-term care facilities, and I've been contacted by many family members who have been refused that designation by the facility. And yes, there is an appeal process, but looking at the phases for when they can expect the vaccine, it could be many months before the appeal is heard by the Patient Care Quality Board and when they will actually get to see their loved ones. And then also I've been contacted by family members who are concerned about their family members who are elderly and living in facilities where they may be living independently and not receiving the vaccine and having dinner next to someone who is not as mobile as they are, but are actually receiving the vaccine today. And I'm just wondering about those two issues.
Yeah, I'll deal with the second issue first. As you're aware, some 650 people have passed away in long-term care from COVID-19. I think the number in assisted living is between 10 and 20, which is obviously very serious. And the number in independent living is much smaller than that, is I think as few as 3. So obviously there's different levels of risk. And that is in this early phase when we have very little vaccine. We've been focused on long-term care because that's the population with their caregivers, protecting them as well. That's the greatest risk. So that's how we've proceeded. So right now, the overwhelming majority of long-term care homes have received first doses of either the Pfizer or the Moderna vaccine around the province. That process will be completed shortly. A very significant portion of assisted living, I believe about half of assisted living facilities and their staff have been immunized, and that is based on the vulnerability of people and the extraordinary vulnerability of people in long-term care. And then the next tier of vulnerability, people in assisted living, and that's why that priority has been put in place. As you can see in the first phase, everyone over 80 will be immunized, and others, including staff working in home care and home support, will be immunized as well. So those are the reasons why there's different categories. I know that in all assisted living facilities that are in the same space as long-term care facilities, for example, they have all been done when the long-term care home is done. So that affects risk. And I should say that every time someone, including staff, every time someone, including your neighbor, is immunized, it makes you considerably safer. The rules with respect to designating as an essential visitor, and these terms are important because for everyone in long-term care, I can say this personally, people know this, and for everyone else, that everyone should feel that their participation, their social life, their visiting of their loved ones is essential. But there's a definition of essential visitors that's been used through the pandemic. We've made changes in that to accommodate people and to put in place an appeal process and consistent rules. The concern has been that those rules haven't been applied equally and everywhere. But our hope is, and the purpose of doing long-term care, first dose, then second dose, of assisted living, first dose, then second dose, is to make those places safer. And what you're going to see in the month of March is changes in both social activity within care homes, to allow more activity
所以按照他的说法呢，因为疫苗的接种计划的话，3月份的话，那么可能这些协助性的护理院以及养老院呢，都可能会慢慢的允许更多的人开放，让他们开放啊，这个允许更多的去探亲了。这个是因为他们那边已经建立起一道防线。
The idea is to keep people safe and to try and return to some sense of normalcy in long-term care, which is so important to the lives of people and to their overall health as soon as possible, is a main focus of our immunization plan.
Mary, do you have a follow-up?
I do. Thanks very much. And I think it might be directed towards Dr. Henry. Just wondering, you have talked about, lifting the restrictions is down the road in the fall. But what about the possibility of maybe from the island going over to somewhere like the Okanagan, going camping? Right now, the suggestion is no non-essential travel. But what are the odds that maybe in July or August a family could head over there and maybe meet up with friends as long as they're still being responsible?
Yeah, I want that as much as everybody. I think we can look to last summer to have a better understanding of risk going down in the summer, and more of our more vulnerable elders, seniors being protected through vaccination. So I absolutely think there's opportunities for us to travel within BC this summer. I think it's not realistic to think there's going to be a lot of safe international travel by this summer.
博尼医生的这个信息很重要。那么看来现实呢，我们夏天啊等等啊，还是省内旅行，听懂了吗？不是非基本旅行了啊，省内旅行啊，国际旅行不需要。那么也希望大家这个不要有像去年夏天那么大规模的这个 party 啊，这个也不要。
To be responsible, to continue to use our layers of protection, but to have increased social interactions and to be able to go to these important places around BC for sure.
We have time for one more today. The last questions will come from Susanna De Silva, CBC.
Thank you very much. I know you've talked about this a bit, but you've placed the extremely vulnerable people, those 69 and younger, in phase 3, the ones with severe respiratory conditions, cancer patients, for instance. We've heard a lot from this. A lot of these people in this group have reached out to us. We know that people in this category have been put on ventilators. Some of them have died. What do you say to those extremely vulnerable people watching right now who might be wondering why they're not in phase 1 or 2?
Well, it is all about marrying a vaccine that we have with risk that we have. So they are absolutely a group of people that are at risk and that we have taken special precautions to protect, whether it's in communities, in their home, in their access to health care. And we need to continue those. Those are incredibly important. But they are in that group of people that as soon as we have vaccine available, we're going to make it available to that relatively small group of medically fragile people who are at that increased risk. I think we need to make it very clear, though, it is not everybody with asthma. It's not everybody with heart disease or with diabetes, which we also know do increase your risk of having more severe infection and ending up in hospital. For those people, age is still the overriding factor, and that's why it's so important for all of us to continue doing what we're doing to keep our numbers down. We've seen this in countries around the world. We see this in other provinces. When we have a lot of transmission, even young people can get very sick, end up in hospital, and die from COVID. So all of us have to maintain what we're doing to keep our transmission rates low, to protect everybody. And we know that that's what protects those who are closest to us and to protect the people that we don't know as well.
Susanna, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, and just to go back to, you mentioned in phase 3 that could be expanded to include some other frontline workers. You mentioned essential industries.
这位记者呢问的还可以，就是说到了疫苗的第3阶段能不能扩充到
who you're looking at to include in that phase, and if you could please also answer in French.
Sure, and absolutely. This is, we are basing the foundation of the plan that we've talked about today.
基本上今天的这个重要的信息呢，已经给大家都介绍完了。总而言之 ，BC 省的新冠疫苗的接种的政策就是年龄。我再说一遍，年龄。第一阶段是到这个2月底。第二阶段是到3月底，第三阶段是从4月到6月，第四阶段是7月到9月。我们大部分人应该都是在7月到9月。我也希望大家都是年轻，都是健康，所以越年轻越健康，就是在越晚。那么时间呢，都是到9月份就结束。如果是55岁没有长期病的，55岁到50岁的，那么基本上第一针7月份，第二针是8月份。那40几岁的呢，是第一针可能是7到8月份，第二针就是9月份。那么30几岁的、20几岁的都是8月份第一针，9月份第二针。我希望我们的所有的听众、所有的观众都落在这个阶段。但是如果疫苗增加了，一定会加快这个过程。所以我希望我们广大的听众观众都落在第4阶段的人群里边。但是我们也双手合十，向上帝祷告，这个疫苗能够越来越快、越来越多的到的话，那么第4阶段很有可能挪到6月份就完成。那这样的话，大家就会更放心。同时呢，这些专家也好，官员也好，一再告诫大家，疫苗来了，但是千万不要再放松，该怎么样还是怎么样，该警惕的还是要警惕大家都坚持到现在了，能够坚持不要再放松。
Ces groupes, ces travailleurs essentiels de notre société, que ce soit des enseignants, que ce soit
那么现在他是最后一个问题呢，说的是法语这个也是没有什么。那么各位观众，今天的这个新冠疫情新增数字呢，他们只能是下午3点钟发邮件了，所以呢，到了礼拜一3点钟的话，我估计呢，他会按照4个时间段给大家汇报了，4个阶段的新增数字分别汇报了。
Il y a beaucoup de confiance, un peu partout dans le monde, mais si c'est possible d'avoir d'autres vaccins, que ce soit AstraZeneca, que ce soit le vaccin de Janssen ou Johnson & Johnson, si on a ces vaccins-là, on va pouvoir faire et travailler avec des autres groupes d'employés, de travailleurs dans une société. Donc, ça c'est important. Nous avons fondé ce plan sur la science.
那么同时呢，也是说到了伯尼医生告诫大家，我们 BC 省可能疫苗加拿大疫苗接种还是在世界前列所以你接种了之后也不一定要考虑，也不要今年夏天做这个国际旅行的计划，不要做了我们省就省内旅行那么这个party 也不要像去年那样都是大规模的大的人。大多数的大的人群的这种 party 也不要尽量考虑了你就要旅行，你非要旅行就省内旅行走走那个其他世界上还有几十亿人口，他们都没有疫苗，所以呢，他们也不一定欢迎你。那么刚才也有一个网友呢说希望年底能够回去。那么我想说希望到年底之前，我们的母国中国能够接受和认可我们在海外的接种的疫苗的计划。好了，那么今天的这个新冠疫苗计划就给大家直播到这儿，感谢大家的收看，也祝各位网友各位观众周末愉快，大家 stay